This is the Voices of Titanic podcast, episode 13, and I'm your host, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me today. I love how my algorithm online just knows me too well. These Titanic passengers and crew keep finding their way to me. I was on Instagram and I came across this interview with Titanic survivor Marguerite Sandström. Popped up in my stories. It was an interview in Swedish. It had subtitles. And what she said to me was really touching and really eye-opening. It's very short, but I think just hearing what someone as a small child at the time, their experience on the ship and how they viewed it, I wanted to know more. So here is the story of the Sandström family. There were 123 Swedes on board the RMS Titanic. Of those 123, 20 were from Jönköping County. And please bear with me as I try to get through these Swedish words. Of those 20, 11 survived. Marguerite, her mother Agnes, and her sister Beatrice were 3 of those 11 survivors. Marguerite's father, Hjalmar Leonard Sandström, was born June 21st, 1886 in Forsheim, Sweden, to parents Johan Alfred Josephson and Johanna Matilda Petersdotter. Forsheim is a small town in southern Sweden with history dating back to the Middle Ages. It was really hard to find any information on this town, but I do know that in 2010 it had a population of about 2,039 people. It's a very compact community, so it's only reaching about 1.95 kilometers in size, which is less than 1 square mile for us Americans. Forsheim is known for its natural beauty, and it's surrounded by forests and lakes, making it a good choice for hiking and fishing. Hjalmar lived in the village of Bobenfabriken with his parents and brothers Herman and Antonius and his sister Ebba Sophia. In 1906, Hjalmar worked as an iron worker and immigrated to the United States on July 20th of that same year. On November 23, 1909, Hjalmar married Agnes Bengtsson in Alameda, California. Agnes was born November 8, 1887, to parents Bengt Bengtsson and Matilda Lovisa Eriksson in the small village of Lurbeck, Sweden. I'm not sure if this is correct because, again, this town had very little information on it, but one source I found said the population in Lurbeck was only 63 people in 2025. Agnes lived with her parents and sisters Agda, Alma, Hedvig, and Edith. She also had brothers Carl, Gustav, and Bengt. On May 1st, 1905, Agnes immigrated to the United States as well. The family set up house in San Francisco, California, and had first daughter Marguerite, who was born March 23rd, 1908. San Francisco has quite a bit of rich history, and it's near and dear to my heart. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet, though, so as not to detract from the story of our passengers. But San Francisco is located in Northern California in the western United States. It's on the northern tip of a peninsula. And the city was named after the Catholic patron saint of animals, St. Francis of Assisi. Due to its conveniently located harbor, San Francisco attracted Spanish settlers in the 1700s. And then during the 1800s, an Englishman named William Richardson founded the site for the modern-day San Francisco in 1822. About a quarter of a century later, the infamous California gold rush brought interest to this new territory, and then the city faced this massive population explosion. So in just 6 short months, the population of San Francisco went from 900 to approximately 26,000 people. With the success and wealth of San Francisco booming, many entrepreneurs were attracted to the area. So in 1852, we see Wells Fargo being founded, and in that same year, Domingo Ghirardelli began his now renowned chocolate factory. And I'm sure we are all familiar with Levi's jeans. Those started being made by Levi Strauss in 1853. Tried pronouncing his name the German way, or else my German friends will kind of come after me. I tried to make that short, but I think I failed. Now let's get back to the Sandström family. Hjalmar and Agnes gave birth to another daughter, Beatrice Irene Sandström, on August 9th, 1910. also in San Francisco. In the 1910 census, Hjalmar is listed as a machinist, and the family was living at 112 Presida Avenue. Now, sometime in 1912, Agnes, Marguerite, and Beatrice were back home in Hultsjö, Sweden, for a visit to Agnes's parents. And then on April 5th, they took a Wilson Line ship, the SS Calypso, from the port of Hull in England to Southampton. And that is where they boarded the RMS Titanic on April 10th with a third-class ticket number 9549. So after reaching New York, their plan was to return to San Francisco, where Hjalmar still resided. Agnes was 24 years old at the time and listed as a housekeeper. Marguerite was 4, and Beatrice was only 1. What's interesting here is that Titanic was not their intended ship. Daughter Beatrice had once said, quote, "As mother came to pick up our tickets, the man told us we had been transferred," end quote. So this was due to the coal strike occurring at the time. The man then reassured them, quote, "You don't have to worry, ma'am, because the ship cannot sink," end quote. I couldn't locate the name of their original ship, but when you think about it, what a striking moment of fate that they were to be transferred onto this ship that, as we all know, was headed for disaster. I really love to emphasize the voices of the people on board the ship so you can hear their experiences in their own words, when possible, of course. So I'm going to be reading you some interview excerpts from Agnes and Marguerite. Both women were later interviewed in 1962 by Sveriges Television. Here is Agnes's interview. The interviewer says, "Mrs. Sandström, how did it come about that you and your daughters found yourselves on the Titanic?" Agnes says, "We were returning to America after a visit home, and because there was a strike, there were no other ships between Gothenburg and Southampton, so we went on it." Interviewer, "Were you also drawn to it because it was a modern and famous ship?" Agnes, "Yes, of course I thought so, although certainly not yet, but it was very nice and grand. It was a big difference from the ship we had tickets on." The interviewer then says, "What class were you traveling in?" She says, "We were in 3rd class." They ask, "It has been mentioned in official reports even that the 3rd-class passengers were neglected. Do you agree?" Agnes says, "No, I don't see that at all. I don't think that was the case. Of course, the people traveling in 3rd class have to know that they didn't pay the same amount as those traveling in 1st or 2nd class. So you can't expect the same level of service. But our service was as good as we could have hoped for. The cabins were nice as was everywhere else. The food was good and the place settings were nice, so we weren't neglected. My friend and I, who shared the same cabin, were sleeping. The collision woke me up, but I thought we had stopped momentarily. But after a while, they knocked on the door and told us to get up, which we had already done. They told us that we had collided with an iceberg and that it had made a hole, but it would be repaired shortly. It would be fixed in a couple of hours, otherwise another ship would come along to pick us up." The interviewer then asks, "So you were never told how serious the situation was?" Agnes answers, "No, probably very few knew, not until the very last moment. Nobody thought it possible because the Titanic couldn't sink." Interviewer, "So even when the ship began listing pretty severely, the seriousness of the situation wasn't fully understood?" Agnes says, "No, not really, but you could sense what was happening when you reached the top deck. When we got there, we had to climb ladders to get there. We saw that there were a lot of Catholics on the ship, and they began crossing themselves, rosaries. So there was a little panic there, but there was none before. We started thinking of calling on Mary, Mother of God." Interviewer, "It must have been difficult for you with the 2 little girls to keep track of." Agnes replied, "Yes, so I couldn't concern myself with everything happening around me. I climbed up to the top deck, and there was rope, and more rope, so I sat down and thought, I'm dead tired. But there was something that drove me to the lifeboat. The first lifeboat was full, and the second one was full as well, so I couldn't get on those. The steward for our cabin was at the 3rd lifeboat, and he told me I was going in this one, and he helped us on. He arranged for the girls to get on first, and then he helped me. The other 2, the first boat I'd wanted to get on, it didn't slide down the rope, so people fell off before it hit the water. In the second boat I wanted to get on, they hadn't inserted the plugs that allowed rainwater to seep through. They hadn't inserted them, so that boat didn't make it. I guess it had been decided that I was going to be saved." Interviewer, "And it was one of those last boats?" Agnes, "Yes, it was. How many there were afterwards I can't say, but maybe 2 or 3. She was then asked, "When you were in the water and rowing away from the sinking ship, how damaged was the Titanic at that point? Was she on her way down?" Agnes says, Yes, she was. It was like she had split in two, and you heard a creak, or what you would call it, just as she split in two. And after that, it didn't take long for her to sink. But she didn't sink in the middle. She sank from both ends. Interviewer: It was women and children first. Did men get in the boats as well? Agnes: Yes. First off, they needed somebody to row, and then you had others trying to sneak aboard, trying to get in, even though they weren't supposed to. They put bags on their heads to look like ladies. Interviewer: Mrs. Sandström, what is your most vivid memory of this night? What do you remember most after all these years? Agnes responds: Seeing them standing on the deck before going into the water, screaming until you couldn't hear them any longer, and also when they tried to cling to the boat and they were pushed away because the boat was so full we couldn't take on anymore. Interviewer: And they couldn't survive many minutes in that cold water. She responds: No, they couldn't. She was then asked, It has been said that the ship's orchestra played Near My God to Thee. Do you know anything about that? Agnes replies, No, I don't. I don't dare comment on it because I didn't hear it, but they very well could have, even though I didn't hear it because my thoughts were with my children. Interviewer: You had made friends with many Swedes on board. What happened to them? Agnes said, I didn't see any of them afterwards. The woman I was closest to didn't make it. We were in the lifeboat from around 1:30. We were in the lifeboat until about 7:30 in the morning when we were picked up by the Carpathia. Interviewer then asked her, Did you have any idea at the time of the scale of the catastrophe that so many people had drowned? Agnes said, No, we didn't. We thought there were more lifeboats who had more passengers that we didn't know about. We only saw the one boat. But there were others who left before us. How many, we didn't know. Interviewer: Your husband lived in San Francisco at the time. Did he know about the accident? Agnes answered, No, not until he heard of it on the radio. There was an evening paper that mentioned an accident at sea, but he didn't know we were on that ship. He found out the day after through a telegram from the ship that we were saved because we were on the Carpathia. The interviewer then responds, And then you had a long trip to San Francisco. Agnes replied, Yes. Once we got to New York, we had to stay there 5 days before going to San Francisco, but it took a week to get there. Interviewer: Was there a trial that you were involved in? Agnes responds, No, there was not. Interviewer asks, What kind of compensation were you given by White Star Line? Agnes answers, Well, I don't remember how much we received, but it was to compensate for lost clothes and other things, but nothing special. It was valued fairly. Interviewer: You didn't stay too long in America. Agnes says, No, we were only there until November, and then we returned home again. She was then asked, Mrs. Sandström, do you have any more tangible memories from the voyage? Agnes says, No, not exactly, but I do have this painting. It was a man who cleaned my cabin. When I returned home, he was a steward on that ship as well. He had painted it and gave it to me. Interviewer then says, You have now lived in Sweden for many years. During this time, have you had contact with any other Swedish survivors? Agnes says, No, I haven't, because I haven't met any who were on that voyage. Interviewer: It has now been 50 years since the Titanic sank. Do you feel like you've gotten over the horrible images you witnessed on the 14th of April, 1912? Agnes responds, Yes, sometimes, but other times I recall. She's then asked, And you remember? Agnes says, I remember everything. And that was the end of the interview. Such a powerful and detailed conversation that we were so fortunate to have on record. You get a little window into what her third-class experience was like on the ship. You get to hear the night of the sinking and how she and her girls found themselves in a lifeboat, which I believe was number 13. What she saw when the ship went down, the death that she witnessed, as well as the rescue and their journey home. Just incredible. And the interview is in black and white, but I will share a screenshot of the painting Agnes referred to. She shows it in the video clip, and it's really gorgeous. I would have loved to have seen it in color. Here is the excerpt from Marguerite's interview. Being only 4 years old at the time of the sinking, it is much shorter than her mother's. Interviewer: Mrs. Peterson, you might have some memories? Marguerite answers, Yes, I remember a little, like in a dream. Interviewer asks, What exactly? Marguerite says, When they woke us, among other things, I was looking for my socks because I wanted them with me. I also remember that as we were leaving, I decided to wash up. Mom said we didn't have time to wash up and that we had to get going. But I had to go turn off the faucet, but she said not to worry because water was going to come rushing in anyway, and then we left. And I remember on deck, getting into the lifeboat, they were going to toss me into it, and I was afraid to lose my stocking cap. I was holding it in my hand, but I was so tired by the time they grabbed me that I changed hands thinking that I would have enough time to grab it, but it ended up in the water. From there, I remember being in the lifeboat. There was a gentleman that started screaming. Mom said they threw him off because he couldn't fit in the boat. I naturally became a bit scared. I entwined my arms in the rope that was in the boat and asked Mother, "They can't take me now that I'm tied up, can they?" And she comforted me that it wouldn't be possible. Then we boarded this big ship, and before pulling me aboard, they put me in a sack and pulled me aboard in it. When I got on board, I began looking for Mother, and I found a lady who helped me find her. When I found her, she was crying, and I wondered why she was crying when we'd had so much fun. But she said, "You don't understand, little one. You'll understand when you're older." And that was the end of her interview. Even though this interview isn't as in-depth as Agnes's, it's still valuable for many reasons, including how something like this would impact a child. She experienced fear in being separated from her mother, but she also didn't quite grasp the magnitude of what had happened and why her mom was crying for her on the Carpathia. It's really difficult to fathom a child witnessing something so horrific and not fully understanding the concept of not only miraculously surviving, but how they just endured this massive tragedy. I really appreciate the people who translated these interviews into English so that we can understand more of their experience as well as the third class experience. Now, as we heard from Agnes, the family did go back home to Sweden shortly after the sinking. Returning to their home country in the autumn of 1912, Agnes and Hjalmar ended up having more children. Son Wilhelm Lunard was born February 24th, 1913. They had another boy, Bengt Alfred, who was born December 13th, 1916. And then several years after that, in 1924, they had son Lars Magnus Sandström. And all these boys were born in Kalmar, Sweden. Sadly, Hjalmar passed away at only 41 years old on October 9th, 1927. I could not locate a cause of death. Agnes, on the other hand, lived a very long life and passed away at 98 years old on December 1st, 1985. And as these things go, I unfortunately don't have a whole lot of information about the fate of the Sandström children. We do know that Marguerite married Otto Peterson, also from Sweden, on July 25th, 1936. It appears they had a son, Bo Roland, born shortly after their marriage in September of that same year. Marguerite passed away at 55 on August 15, 1963. Sister Beatrice Irene possibly married a man named Sven Folk Nilsson. I'm not entirely sure. Trying to find these old records and with them being predominantly in Swedish is very difficult, but her name and birthday match to these records, so I want to say that they are true and that they had a daughter named Siv Irene as well, but again, might not be the right people. What I can say with certainty is that Beatrice lived a full life until September 3rd, 1995, when she passed at 85 years old. Sadly, I have nothing on Wilhelm other than that he passed away at 61 years old in 1974 on March 30th. We do know that Bengt Alfred was married on March 25th, 1944 to Maj Elisabeth Forsberg. They had a daughter, Gunilla Elisabeth, born September 27th, 1945 in Motala, Sweden. Bengt died on July 9th, 2009 at an impressive 92 years old. Lastly, Lars Magnus passed away at 71 on February 19th, 1996. Of the 123 Swedish passengers on board the ship, only 34 survived. And how fortunate that the Sandströms were to be 3 of those 34. To be in third class and to be transferred onto this ship, of all ships, what are the chances? And what's really scary is that Hjalmar didn't even know that his family was on the Titanic. I can only imagine the horror and the shock he must have felt when he discovered they were on the ship. It's incredibly lucky they survived, and I'm sure their reunion was one of relief and bittersweet joy. A lot of our stories talk of trauma. I don't know if the Sandströms moved back to Sweden after the disaster because of this incident or if it was the plan all along. Going back to Sweden meant they would have to get on a ship yet again. So we may never know, but I'm really thankful that this family lived and was able to expand their family and live long lives. If the Sandströms didn't survive the sinking, those 3 boys, Wilhelm, Bengt, and Lars, would have never been born, and none of them would have had the chance to have their children either. We constantly see this ripple effect happening the consequences of this one night in history impacting the future of family lines. It's horrifying yet fascinating at the same time, how a couple hours changed thousands upon thousands of lives. Their survival is miraculous to me. Agnes was exhausted. She was scared. She was witnessing panic and death. She was hearing screams, but she stayed strong for her girls, and she felt this pull, this magnetism to get to the lifeboats. I'm not sure who her steward was, but how incredible and fortunate that he showed them to that third lifeboat when the first two they encountered were not meant to be. I feel like so many of these stories of survival really come down to luck and to timing, and thankfully for this family, it was in their favor when many others were not so lucky. Let's pause and have a moment of silence for the hundreds of lives that were lost that night, including the Swedish passengers who did not make it. And let's also pay our respects to survivors Agnes, Marguerite, and Beatrice and what they endured that night. Thank you, crew, for joining me in today's episode as we disembark. I wish you happiness, love, and peace. Take care, and I'll see you next time on the Voices of Titanic.